The loner rancher waited for a common mail-order bride, but a woman too beautiful for him arrived. John Peterson had always lived alone. His ranch, located deep in the wide-open plains of Montana, was far away from the nearest town. The nearest neighbor's house was miles away, and the only sounds that filled the air were the wind rustling through the tall grasses, the occasional call of a hawk, and the steady lowing of his cattle. It was quiet, too quiet, some might say, but John had grown used to it. After losing his wife many years ago, solitude had become a part of his life. He had learned to value the calm, the slow pace, and the independence that came with living alone. His days were long and full of work, but his nights could feel painfully empty. The ranch itself was large, stretching over hundreds of acres. John had inherited it from his father, who had worked the land with his hands from dawn to dusk. The old wooden barn had weathered many storms, and the house, though small and simple, had sturdy walls and a welcoming hearth. Every morning, John would rise with the sun. He fed the animals, checked the fences, and walked the fields to make sure nothing was wrong. It was a routine he had done for years, and while the work was physically demanding, it gave him a sense of purpose. Yet, in the quiet moments between chores, he felt a deep loneliness that the vast landscape could not fill. Over the years, John had tried to be part of the community in the nearby town. He attended the occasional local gathering, helped out when neighbors needed a hand, and traded supplies at the general store. People liked him, respected him even, but they also saw him as distant, a man who preferred his own company. They knew little about the man behind the quiet demeanor. John had learned to keep his thoughts to himself, not because he was unfriendly, but because sharing often led to disappointment. People came and went, but the land remained steadfast and patient, like a friend who never spoke but always listened. As the years passed, John found himself thinking more and more about companionship. Not just anyone could live on a ranch. He knew that. Life there was hard, unpredictable, and required resilience. Someone had to be willing to wake before dawn, face the elements, and share in the endless work that ranch life demanded. But more than that, John wanted someone who could be a true partner, someone who could understand the quiet joys and hardships of living so far from the bustle of town. He dreamed of evenings spent by the fire, sharing stories, laughter, and simple meals. He imagined the warmth of having another presence in the house, someone to notice the small details of daily life, to share his triumphs and his worries. One evening, as he sat on the porch watching the sun set behind the distant hills, John saw an advertisement in an old magazine his sister had sent him. It described a way for lonely men and women to find companionship through letters, a practice that had existed for decades. The idea of a mail-order bride was not new, but to John it felt like a lifeline. It offered the possibility of meeting someone who might be willing to share a life on the ranch, someone who could be a true companion. The thought both excited and frightened him. Writing letters, sharing his life and hopes with a stranger, was a bold step for a man who had spent so many years in isolation. Yet the more he considered it, the more it felt like the only path forward. John carefully composed his advertisement. He wrote honestly, describing his life, the work, and the challenges of ranch living. He explained that he sought a woman who valued simplicity, kindness, and honesty. He emphasized that the life he offered was not glamorous, but it was steady and grounded. He made no promises of wealth or luxury, only the possibility of partnership and shared life. Writing those words made him nervous. Would anyone understand what he truly sought? Would anyone respond to a man who lived so far away, whose days were filled with work and whose nights were often lonely? After sending the advertisement, John waited. The days stretched into weeks. Each morning he completed his chores, riding his horse across the fields, mending fences, feeding the animals, and checking the water supply. Each evening he returned to the house, hoping to find letters waiting in the mailbox. And then, slowly, they began to arrive. At first they were few and simple, polite letters from women who were curious but cautious. They asked questions about the ranch, about the work, about life in such a remote place. John answered each one thoughtfully, writing long letters that described the land, his daily routines, and his hopes for the future. Some letters spoke of shared dreams, while others revealed a desire for adventure, a longing for something different than city life. With each letter, John felt a mixture of excitement and hesitation. Some women seemed practical and kind, exactly what he had hoped for. Others seemed too unsure, hesitant to embrace a life so different from what they had known. He realized that finding the right person would not be easy. It required patience, discernment, and courage from both sides. He also began to understand more about himself, his own fears, his own hopes, and the qualities he truly valued in a partner. Writing and reading these letters became a ritual, a way to connect with the world beyond the ranch, and to imagine a future that once seemed impossible. As the weeks turned into months, John grew more hopeful. He found himself looking forward to the arrival of the right woman, wondering how she might look, how she might laugh, how she might react to the wide-open spaces and the quiet rhythms of ranch life. He imagined sharing stories by the fire, walking through the fields together, and discovering the small joys of life on the land with someone who truly understood. He had learned to live alone, to manage every task, and to endure the isolation. But now he felt that life could be richer, fuller, and more meaningful with someone by his side. Even with all this preparation, John could not predict what would happen. The letters had given him hope, but nothing could prepare him for the reality of meeting someone for the first time, face to face. He tried to keep his expectations simple, reminding himself that the right person might not be exactly as he imagined. Perhaps she would be quiet and gentle, perhaps practical and modest. Perhaps she would be completely different from him in ways he had not imagined. And yet, in his heart, he dared to dream of a connection that could last a lifetime, a bond that would turn the lonely ranch into a home filled with warmth and companionship. Every morning as he walked the fields and listened to the wind through the grasses, John felt a sense of anticipation he had not experienced in years. The ranch was still quiet, the work still demanding, but now there was a sense of possibility in the air. He knew that change was coming, that someone might arrive who would transform the rhythm of his life, not by changing the land, but by sharing it with him. And in that hope, John found a quiet joy, a reminder that even in the most isolated corners of the world, human connection remained a powerful, unyielding force. And so John waited, as he had waited for so many years, not just for a letter, not just for a reply, but for the possibility of companionship that could turn the solitude of his ranch into a shared life, full of laughter, hard work, and the simple beauty of living alongside someone who truly cared. Each day was a step closer to meeting the person who might finally understand the life he had built, the land he had tended, and the quiet heart he had kept hidden for so long. John's days continued with the same rhythm they always had. He rose with the sun, worked in the fields, tended to the cattle, and returned home as the sky turned shades of orange and pink. But now, there was a new layer of excitement beneath the familiar routine. Every sound at the mailbox made him pause. Every passing car along the dusty road made him wonder if it could be her. Each letter he received became more important than the day before. John read and reread the words, thinking about the person behind them. He began to imagine what she might look like. how her voice might sound and whether she would laugh at his jokes or perhaps at the way he sometimes fumbled over words and letters. Some letters were short, polite, and careful. They asked about the work, the house, the land, and the weather. Others were more personal, filled with dreams of companionship and hopes for a life shared on a ranch. John responded to every letter with equal care. He tried to be honest about his life, about the hard work, the long hours, and the isolation that came with ranch living. He also tried to express what he longed for, a companion who could share in the quiet joys and challenges, someone patient, kind, and understanding. Writing these letters required him to open his heart in ways he had not done for many years. Some nights after a long day of work, John would sit by the fire, reading and responding to letters by lantern light. The fire crackled, casting dancing shadows on the walls, and the smell of burning wood mixed with the faint scent of the night air drifting through the open window. He would sometimes pause, looking at the dark horizon beyond the house, imagining someone standing there with him, watching the sunset. The thought brought warmth to a heart that had grown accustomed to solitude. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to dream of a shared life, a life that included laughter, conversation, and someone to share both work and rest. As weeks turned into months, John noticed that some letters spoke more to him than others. One letter described a woman who loved quiet mornings, the sound of birds, and the beauty of wide-open spaces. Another described someone who had grown up in a city but longed for a simpler life, willing to try ranch work if it meant finding companionship. These letters made his heart beat faster. He began to respond with more detail, sharing stories from his past, memories of his father, tales of cattle drives, and moments of humor that had kept him sane through the long years of isolation. He wanted the women writing to him to understand the rhythms of his life, the demands of the land, and the joys he found in small, everyday moments. Despite the hope these letters brought, John also felt doubt. He worried that no one would truly be able to handle life on the ranch. The work was not easy, and the solitude could be overwhelming. Sometimes he imagined a woman arriving with bright eyes, ready to work, only to be disappointed by the harsh reality of daily life, the early mornings, the heavy chores, and the long stretches without seeing anyone else. But then he reminded himself that he had been waiting for a long time, and patience was necessary. He had learned from years of solitude that the right person was worth waiting for, and that compromise and understanding were part of any meaningful connection. John also found himself thinking about the kind of woman he wanted in ways he had never before considered. He wanted someone strong enough to handle the work, yes, but also gentle enough to understand the quiet moments. He wanted someone curious, someone willing to learn the ways of ranch life while bringing her own perspective to it. He imagined her learning to ride a horse, helping in the fields, and sharing meals prepared together. He wanted a partner who could share both the practical and emotional sides of life. Each letter he received helped him clarify what he truly desired, not just companionship, but a genuine partnership built on respect, understanding, and shared effort. As he continued his correspondence, John realized that he was beginning to feel connected to these women even before meeting them. Each letter carried a piece of personality, a glimpse into someone else's world. He would sometimes imagine reading a letter aloud, hearing the tone of her words as if she were sitting in the room with him. It became a quiet ritual of connection, a way to feel less alone in the vast expanse of his land. He began to treasure the small details, the handwriting, the phrasing, the little stories that revealed character and warmth. The letters also sparked dreams of the future. John imagined the day a woman would arrive, walking down the path from the road to the ranch. He imagined opening the door and seeing her there, smiling nervously or curiously, perhaps holding a small bag or suitcase. He thought about introducing her to the animals, showing her the house, and sharing the first meal together. Every scenario played in his mind, each one slightly different, yet all filled with the hope of companionship and shared life. The anticipation was both thrilling and nerve-wracking, a mix of excitement and the fear of the unknown. At times, John also worried about appearances. He wondered if a woman would find him plain or unrefined. His clothes were simple, often worn from hard work, and his hands were calloused from years of labor. He was not a man of polish or sophistication, and he feared that someone might find the ranch life too rough or too lonely. Yet he reminded himself that he was honest and dependable, and that these qualities mattered more than appearances. He had a steady heart, a reliable nature, and a willingness to work hard and care for someone else. These were the qualities he hoped would attract the right person. As the weeks passed, John's hope grew stronger. He began to notice subtle changes in himself. He smiled more often, even when alone. He hummed tunes while working in the fields. He allowed himself to imagine the sound of laughter in his home again, the warmth of conversation, and the shared satisfaction of completing tasks together. His world, once dominated by silence and routine, now carried the thrill of possibility. Each letter was a step toward that possibility, each word a bridge between his solitude and the life he longed to share. Then, one day, a letter arrived that changed everything. It was different from the others. The handwriting was elegant, flowing, confident. The words were expressive, lively, and filled with curiosity. She wrote not only about herself but asked questions about him, about the ranch, about his hopes and daily life. She wrote with a sense of confidence that suggested she was not afraid of hard work, but also carried a sense of grace and sophistication that John had not expected. Reading her letter, John felt a spark of excitement he had not experienced before. Could this be the woman he had been waiting for? He read the letter again and again, savoring each sentence, noting the small details that revealed her personality. She spoke of learning new skills, of enjoying the outdoors, and of valuing honesty and kindness above all. She expressed curiosity about the land, the animals, and the quiet life of the ranch. Her words suggested that she might indeed be ready to step into his world, bringing her own energy and perspective while embracing the life he had built. John felt hope and a nervous anticipation he had not allowed himself to feel in years. From that day on, John could hardly focus on his chores without thinking of her. Each time he rode his horse through the fields, he imagined her walking beside him, asking questions, laughing at his stories, and sharing in the work he had done alone for so long. He prepared himself for her arrival, cleaning the house thoroughly, mending broken fences, and making sure everything was in order. He wanted her first impression to be good, to show her that he valued her presence and that the ranch could be a home where she would feel welcome. Even as he prepared, John reminded himself to stay patient. He had learned that rushing or expecting too much could lead to disappointment, but now, more than ever, he allowed himself to dream. He pictured the day she would step off the stagecoach or train, her eyes bright with curiosity, her smile nervous yet hopeful. He imagined greeting her, offering a hand or a warm smile, and starting a new chapter of his life together. The letters had brought them close, even from miles apart, and soon he hoped they would meet in person. For the first time in years, John felt a true sense of anticipation, not just for work, not just for routine, but for the possibility of companionship, love, and shared life. He realized that the loneliness that had been his constant companion could soon be replaced by laughter, conversation, and the quiet joy of having someone by his side. The ranch, with its wide-open fields, sturdy fences, and hard-working animals, was ready for a new chapter. And so, with hope in his heart and a careful watch for the first sign of her arrival, John continued his work, each day filled with the quiet excitement of awaiting the woman who might change his life forever. The morning the letter had promised her arrival finally came. John felt a nervous energy he had not experienced in years. He rose before the sun, his hands shaking slightly as he prepared the house. The rooms had been cleaned, the furniture dusted, and fresh linens laid on the beds. The table was set with care, though he knew she might not even notice the small details. He wanted everything to be perfect, not because he expected her to judge, but because he wanted to show respect and consideration, to let her know that her arrival mattered to him. The ranch had been his solitary world for so long, and now it was about to change. The journey from the town to the ranch was long, dusty, and uneven. John waited at the small station near the edge of the town, watching the stagecoach as it slowly approached from the horizon. His heart beat faster with each passing moment. He had imagined this moment countless times in his mind. Her stepping off the coach, her eyes taking in the land, the barn, and the house. But now that the moment was real, he felt a strange mixture of excitement, fear, and uncertainty. Would she like the ranch? Would she find it too rough, too isolated, too far from the life she had known? When the stagecoach finally stopped, a hush fell over the small crowd gathered at the station. People whispered quietly among themselves, curious about the woman who had answered the advertisement and traveled all this way. John stepped forward, and his eyes fell on her immediately. She was unlike anyone he had imagined. Her posture was confident, and she moved with a grace that made her seem almost unreal in the rugged surroundings. She was strikingly beautiful, with sharp, expressive features and eyes that seemed to hold both intelligence and warmth. Her clothing was neat and well-made, and she carried herself as though she were stepping into a different kind of life altogether. John felt a wave of intimidation wash over him. He had expected someone practical, modest, maybe even plain. This woman, with her elegance and poise, seemed far beyond what he had pictured. For a moment he worried that he would not be able to meet her presence, that his rough hands, worn clothes, and simple manners would seem inadequate. He cleared his throat, forcing himself to speak. "Hello, I'm John," he said, offering a hand. She smiled politely, and for a moment he wondered if she felt the same hesitation he did. "Hello, John," she replied, her voice clear and pleasant. "I'm Clara." She extended her hand, and he noticed the firmness of her grip, the calm confidence behind it. Her eyes took in the ranch, the wide fields, the barn, and the house, but she did not flinch or hesitate. Instead, she looked thoughtful, as though she were already imagining how she might fit into this new world. John felt a small flicker of hope. Perhaps she would adapt. Perhaps this was the beginning of something extraordinary. The journey back to the ranch was quiet, filled with awkward small talk and stolen glances. John pointed out landmarks, the barn, the fence lines, and the fields he had worked for years. Clara asked questions about the cattle, the crops, and even the routines of daily life. Her questions were curious, respectful, and thoughtful, which reassured John. She was not dismissive or overwhelmed. She wanted to understand. At the same time, he noticed the elegance in her movements, the way she carried herself, which seemed almost out of place in the dusty, rough world of the ranch. He wondered how someone so refined could adapt to a life that demanded hard work, patience, and endurance. When they arrived at the house, John showed her inside. The rooms were simple but clean, the fire still warm in the hearth from his early morning preparations. Clara walked slowly through the rooms, touching the wooden furniture lightly, looking around with curiosity and appreciation. She smiled when she saw the small touches he had added, fresh flowers on the table, neatly folded blankets, and simple curtains he had mended himself. "It's very cozy," she said softly, and John felt a mix of relief and surprise. Perhaps she could feel at home here after all. They sat down for a simple meal, and John noticed the subtle way Clara observed everything: the placement of utensils, the warmth of the food, the quiet rhythm of the house. She ate politely, asking questions about the ingredients, the cooking, and the routines she would need to learn. John found himself relaxing, sharing stories from the ranch, tales of the animals, and memories of his father who had taught him the work of the land. Clara listened attentively, nodding, smiling, and occasionally laughing softly at his dry humor. For the first time in a long while, John felt a sense of companionship, even though the day was only beginning. The afternoon was spent walking through the fields. John showed Clara the fences, the water supply, and the areas where the cattle grazed. He explained the work that needed to be done each day, the importance of caring for the animals, and the rhythm of ranch life. Clara asked questions, not with hesitation but with curiosity and intelligence. She seemed eager to learn, not afraid to admit what she did not know. John felt a growing respect for her. She was not merely visiting. She was trying to understand, trying to adapt, and that willingness impressed him deeply. Even so, there were moments of tension. John sometimes stumbled over his words, nervous in her presence. He worried that she might find him awkward, rough, or too plain. Clara, in turn, seemed aware of her own elegance and the difference between her world and the ranch, and for a moment he thought she might feel out of place. But she did not retreat or complain. Instead, she adapted. She asked questions, tried simple tasks, and made gentle observations. Her presence was bright, lively, and sometimes overwhelming, but it was never unpleasant. John found himself both intimidated and intrigued, wondering how this woman, so different from him, could become a part of his life. As the day turned to evening, John prepared a fire outside. They sat together under the vast Montana sky, the stars beginning to appear one by one. Clara seemed fascinated by the expanse of the land, the silence, and the stars that shone so brightly without city lights. She asked questions about the constellations, about the animals in the dark, and about the seasons of the ranch. John answered patiently, explaining the ways he had learned to read the land, the weather, and the animals over decades of experience. He began to feel a tentative connection, a sense that perhaps this unusual match could work after all. Throughout the evening, John realized that while Clara was far more beautiful and sophisticated than he had expected, she also possessed a curiosity, a resilience, and a willingness to engage with his world that gave him hope. She was not intimidated by the challenges, nor was she dismissive of the simple routines of life on the ranch. Instead, she seemed to embrace the unknown with a quiet confidence, asking questions, observing, and slowly learning. John found himself smiling more than he had in years, feeling a warmth that had been missing from his life. By the end of the day, John felt both exhausted and exhilarated. The first meeting had been a mix of nerves, curiosity, and surprise. He realized that Clara was not exactly what he had expected. She was more elegant, more confident, and more refined. But she was also willing to step into a world very different from her own. She had shown patience, intelligence, and a genuine interest in understanding his life. John knew that this was only the beginning. The days ahead would be filled with learning, adjustments, and perhaps even friction. But there was potential, and for the first time in years, he allowed himself to imagine a future with her by his side. As he watched her settle into the small guest room he had prepared, John felt a mix of hope and apprehension. He wondered how she would manage the work, the isolation, and the simplicity of ranch life. Yet he also knew that she had taken the first step, traveling across the country, leaving behind her world to join his. That courage, that willingness to try, was more than he could have hoped for. It gave him faith that perhaps, despite the differences and the initial surprises, they could build something meaningful together. And so, as the ranch settled into the quiet of night, John felt a new sense of anticipation. The woman who had seemed too beautiful, too different, and too sophisticated for his life was now there. She was real, present, and curious. And though he did not yet know the challenges that lay ahead, he felt that something remarkable had begun. Something that could transform the solitude of his ranch into a life shared with another. A life full of discovery, companionship, and perhaps even love. The days that followed Clara's arrival were filled with new experiences for both of them. John watched her closely, noticing how she moved through the house, the barn, and the fields. She was graceful and confident, yet sometimes hesitant when faced with the more difficult chores. John had expected someone to be practical and unassuming, someone whose hands were ready for hard work from the start. Clara, however, moved with elegance, as though the land was a stage and she was learning a new performance. At first, this difference made him uneasy. He worried that she might not be able to handle the reality of ranch life. The mornings began early, as they always had on the ranch. Clara struggled at first with the physical demands of the work. Feeding the animals, hauling water, repairing fences, and tending to the fields was exhausting for someone unaccustomed to such labor. John could see her fatigue in her eyes, but he also noticed her determination. She never complained, though she admitted when a task was difficult. Instead of becoming discouraged, she asked questions, watched carefully, and tried again. John found himself both impressed and humbled. Here was a woman who could have been intimidated by the land, by the hard work, by the isolation, and yet she persisted. Despite her effort, their differences were clear. Clara spoke with a refined voice, and her movements often seemed too delicate for the chores at hand. She carried herself in a way that seemed almost out of place among the rough tools, dusty floors, and muddy pens. John, used to decades of hard labor, sometimes struggled to understand her world. He had assumed he would be teaching someone simple and practical, but Clara's sophistication and intelligence made him think differently. He had to remind himself that differences did not mean failure. Perhaps, he thought, these differences could become strengths if they learned from each other. At mealtime, their differences became even more apparent. John's meals were simple, hearty, and practical, often cooked quickly after long hours of work. Clara, on the other hand, enjoyed more thoughtful preparation, adding details that he had never considered, seasonings, fresh ingredients, and attention to presentation. At first, John found this both amusing and bewildering. He could not imagine spending so much time on a meal after a full day of labor. But as he tasted her cooking, he realized it brought a new richness to life on the ranch. He began to appreciate the effort, the care, and the thought she put into even the smallest details. It was a lesson in patience, and slowly he began to adapt to her ways, just as she adapted to his. The afternoons were spent in the fields, walking among the cattle, checking fences, and maintaining the land. John taught Clara the skills he had honed over decades, the best ways to move the cattle, how to repair a broken fence post, how to recognize the signs of illness in an animal. Clara listened carefully, asked thoughtful questions, and tried to remember everything. She occasionally made mistakes, but never twice in the same way, showing that she was learning quickly. John found himself proud, but also frustrated at times. He wanted to protect her from the hardest parts of the work, yet he knew that true partnership meant sharing both the difficulties and the rewards. Despite the tension that sometimes arose from their differences, small moments of connection began to appear. John noticed the way Clara laughed at his dry humor, even when she did not fully understand it. He observed her patience when teaching the animals, her gentle way of handling them despite her initial awkwardness. He began to see that her presence brought a softness to the ranch, a warmth that had been missing for so long. Clara, in turn, noticed John's quiet thoughtfulness, his steady hands, and his deep knowledge of the land. She admired the way he could anticipate the needs of the animals and the rhythm of the seasons. Slowly, mutual respect was forming between them. Evenings became a time of bonding. After the day's work was done, they would sit by the fire, often in silence at first, listening to the wind in the grasses and the occasional call of a distant owl. Sometimes they would share stories, John recounting memories of his father, his childhood on the ranch, and the challenges of keeping the land going. Clara speaking of her life in the city, her family, and the education she had received. At first, the stories highlighted the differences between them, making John aware of how much she had experienced outside of ranch life. But gradually, he began to see that her experiences added depth and perspective, and he started to enjoy learning from her just as much as she was learning from him. There were moments of tension, of course. Clara sometimes struggled with the physical demands of ranch life, and John occasionally felt frustrated by her cautious approach to some tasks. She sometimes became impatient with his slow methods or questioned why certain tasks were done in a particular way. But these moments were rare and brief, followed by reflection and compromise. Over time, they learned to communicate better, to anticipate each other's needs, and to find solutions together. The process was not easy, but it was teaching them patience, understanding, and the importance of compromise in a partnership. On weekends, John decided to show Clara the broader area surrounding the ranch. He took her to nearby streams, hidden groves of trees, and the hilltops that offered sweeping views of the plains. Clara marveled at the beauty of the landscape, often stopping to sketch or take notes about what she saw. John found it fascinating how she perceived the land differently, noticing details he had taken for granted. The way the sunlight hit the grass, the shapes of clouds, and the patterns of the river below. Her perspective reminded him that even in familiar surroundings, there was always something new to discover if one looked closely. Their growing companionship was not just about learning and work. It was also about shared experiences and small joys. They began to develop rituals, morning coffee on the porch, walks through the fields after dinner, and quiet nights under the stars. Clara introduced small games and stories from her past, bringing laughter and lightheartedness into the ranch. John, who had spent so long in solitude, found these moments invaluable. He realized that life was not just about work or survival. It was also about connection, joy, and shared memories. The differences that had seemed so stark at first were now the threads weaving them closer together. Neighbors began to notice the change as well. John, who had always been solitary, began to emerge more often, walking with Clara, showing her the land, and participating in local gatherings with a new sense of ease. Clara's presence seemed to soften his rough edges, making him more approachable, more willing to engage with others. At the same time, John grounded Clara in the realities of ranch life, teaching her resilience, patience, and the satisfaction of seeing work completed. Together, they formed a balance, two very different people learning from each other and slowly growing closer with each passing day. Despite the progress, both John and Clara knew there would be challenges ahead. Ranch life was demanding, unpredictable, and sometimes harsh. There were storms, broken equipment, and unexpected difficulties with the animals. There were days when Clara's elegance clashed with the rough work, and days when John's straightforward, practical approach seemed to overwhelm her. But even in these moments, they discovered that mutual respect, patience, and willingness to learn were stronger than any difference between them. Every challenge became an opportunity to grow closer, to understand each other better, and to build a partnership that was both resilient and meaningful. By the end of the first season together, John and Clara had learned more about each other than either could have imagined. They had faced the difficulties of ranch life, celebrated small victories, and shared moments of laughter and reflection. The initial awkwardness and uncertainty had transformed into respect, understanding, and genuine affection. John had discovered that Clara's elegance and intelligence did not distance her from the work. They complemented it. And Clara had realized that John's strength, patience, and deep connection to the land were qualities to be admired, appreciated, and shared. As winter approached, the ranch was quieter, the work slower, and the evenings longer. John and Clara sat together by the fire, reflecting on the months that had passed. They spoke of the challenges, the lessons learned, and the joys discovered in shared work and companionship. Both realized that the differences that had once seemed so significant were now the foundation of a deeper connection. They had learned to adapt to each other's strengths and weaknesses, and in doing so, they had discovered the true meaning of partnership. And so, life on the ranch continued, transformed in ways neither John nor Clara had expected. The land remained vast and challenging, but it no longer felt lonely. The house, once filled with silence, now carried laughter, conversation, and the warmth of shared effort. John had discovered that someone seemingly too different could become the perfect companion. Clara had learned that the rugged, demanding world of the ranch held beauty, purpose, and a sense of home she had never known. Together, they were building a life that combined their differences into something stronger, richer, and more meaningful than either could have imagined alone. As the months turned into years, life on the ranch became a rhythm shared between John and Clara. What had begun as curiosity, tentative steps, and quiet observation had grown into a strong, dependable partnership. The initial differences that had seemed so pronounced, John's rugged practicality and Clara's elegance, had transformed into strengths that complemented one another. John's experience and deep knowledge of the land guided them through each challenge, while Clara's curiosity, intelligence, and attention to detail brought a new energy to the ranch. Together, they created a life neither could have imagined alone. The days began early, as they always had, but the mornings now carried a different warmth. Clara rose with the sun, helping John feed the cattle, check the fences, and plan the day's work. Her hands, once unaccustomed to the labor, had grown steady and capable. She learned to repair broken boards, lift heavy buckets, and guide the horses with confidence. John watched her with admiration, noting how far she had come from the nervous young woman who had first stepped onto the ranch months before. Her elegance had not disappeared. It had simply found a new balance, alongside resilience, skill, and strength. Evening meals became a time of celebration, both of work completed and companionship shared. Clara's cooking had grown into a comfortable rhythm, blending practicality with creativity. She introduced new dishes inspired by her upbringing, but also respected the simplicity that ranch life required. John, in turn, learned to appreciate the care she put into every meal, understanding that the effort reflected not just skill, but love and consideration. Their conversations during dinner were lively and engaging. They shared stories, dreams, and reflections, each learning from the other. Where once there had been awkward pauses and uncertainty, now there was laughter, understanding, and deep connection. The ranch itself seemed to transform with Clara's presence. The buildings were well maintained, the fences stronger, and the fields more organized. Even the animals responded to the shared care of their two owners. The cattle moved more smoothly during drives, the horses were calmer under their combined guidance, and the land itself seemed more vibrant under the attention of two people working in harmony. John often reflected on how remarkable it was that one person could bring such change, not only to the ranch, but to the way he experienced it. Where once he had felt the heavy weight of solitude, Now there was companionship, laughter, and the quiet joy of shared life. Neighbors began to notice the change as well. John, who had long been a solitary figure, now appeared more open and engaged. Clara's presence seemed to soften his gruffness, while John's steadiness grounded her enthusiasm. Together they participated in local events, shared stories with neighbors, and offered help when needed. People often remarked on their unusual match, the rugged, solitary rancher and the elegant, intelligent woman, but those who knew them understood that the combination worked. The differences that had once seemed insurmountable had become the foundation of a balanced and enduring partnership. Life on the ranch was not without challenges. Storms came, equipment broke, and animals fell ill. There were long days when the work seemed endless, and moments when frustration and exhaustion tested their patience. But these challenges, instead of driving them apart, strengthened their bond. They learned to communicate better, anticipate each other's needs, and rely on one another in ways they had never imagined. John's experience guided them through practical problems, while Clara's careful attention and perspective often offered solutions he might have overlooked. In the face of adversity, they discovered the power of cooperation, trust, and shared responsibility. Clara also brought new joys into John's life. Her curiosity and intelligence transformed everyday routines into opportunities for learning and discovery. They would explore hidden valleys, watch the changing colors of the sky, or study the stars at night. She introduced him to books and stories he had never read, and he taught her about the cycles of the land, the habits of animals, and the skills required to maintain a ranch. Each day they discovered something new about the land, the animals, and each other. Life became richer and more meaningful, filled with shared achievements and small triumphs that neither could have fully appreciated alone. The quiet moments became the most cherished. Sitting by the fire, hand in hand, listening to the wind in the grasses, or walking together under the vast Montana sky, John and Clara found a peace that had eluded them both before. Clara's presence softened the loneliness that had once been John's constant companion, while John's steadfastness provided Clara with a sense of security and belonging she had never experienced. They laughed together, shared worries, celebrated successes, and comforted each other in times of difficulty. Over time, these moments of shared experience created a depth of intimacy and understanding that neither words nor letters could have prepared them for. The seasons passed, each bringing its own challenges and rewards. Spring brought planting and preparation, summer the long days of hard labor and growth, autumn the harvest and reflection, and winter the quiet stillness of the land under snow. Through it all, John and Clara worked side by side, learning from one another, supporting one another, and growing closer with each passing day. The ranch, once a place of solitude and hard work, had become a home filled with life, laughter, and connection. The landscape, vast and rugged, seemed less lonely, with two people committed to facing it together. Neighbors and visitors often commented on the remarkable transformation of both John and Clara. The rancher, who had once been solitary and reserved, now smiled more, laughed more, and shared stories freely. The elegant woman who had arrived, unsure of herself at first, now moved confidently through the fields, guiding the work, tending to the animals, and participating fully in ranch life. Their partnership became a quiet example of balance, respect, and shared purpose. People began to understand that love and companionship could flourish even in the most unlikely circumstances, given patience, effort, and mutual understanding. Over time, John and Clara also reflected on how their lives had changed in ways neither had expected. John realized that Clara had taught him to appreciate the small joys, the beauty in detail, and the richness of shared life. He understood that companionship could transform solitude into something vibrant, meaningful, and fulfilling. Clara, in turn, learned that strength and resilience could be found in unexpected places, that simplicity held its own beauty, and that love could flourish in a world that demanded hard work and patience. Together, they had created a life that was richer, fuller, and more satisfying than either could have imagined alone. Evenings on the ranch became moments of reflection and gratitude. They would sit together, watching the sun dip below the horizon, feeling the cool wind on their faces, and listening to the distant sounds of animals settling for the night. They spoke quietly of dreams for the future, plans for the ranch, and hopes for the life they were building together. Each day, each shared experience, each challenge overcome, had deepened their bond. They no longer saw the differences between them as obstacles, but as complementary strengths that made their partnership stronger. As the years passed, the story of John and Clara became a quiet legend in the local community. People spoke of the loner rancher and the elegant woman who had traveled across the country to join him. They marveled at how two people, so different in appearance and upbringing, had created a life of harmony, shared purpose, and deep companionship. John and Clara paid little attention to the whispers, for they had discovered something far more important than approval. They had found a home in each other, a bond rooted in respect, effort, and love. In the evenings, as the stars shone brightly above the wide Montana plains, John often reflected on the journey that had brought Clara to his ranch. He thought about the letters, the waiting, the anticipation, and the surprises of their first meeting. He realized that the woman who had seemed too beautiful, too refined, and too different for his life had become his perfect partner. She had taught him patience, brought warmth to the home, and shared in every challenge and triumph. Their life together, though not without effort, was richer and more fulfilling than he could have ever imagined. Clara, too, often reflected on their journey. She remembered the nervous excitement of stepping onto the ranch for the first time, the surprise at how different life would be, and the gradual process of learning, adapting, and growing together. She realized that John's steadfastness, strength, and patience had made it possible for her to thrive, and that their differences had become the foundation for a partnership filled with understanding and mutual respect. She felt a deep gratitude for the life they had built, a life of shared effort, quiet joys, and enduring love. Together, John and Clara had transformed not only the ranch but also each other. The land, once a place of solitude, had become a home filled with laughter, warmth, and shared purpose. Their partnership had proven that differences could be strengths, that patience and effort could overcome challenges, and that love could flourish in unexpected places. The ranch, the animals, and the wide Montana skies were now witnesses to a life built on trust, respect, and deep companionship. And so, as the sun set each evening and the wind whispered through the grasses, John and Clara continued their life together. The ranch, once a lonely expanse of land, had become a place of connection, growth, and enduring love. Their story, though quiet and unassuming, was a testament to the power of patience, understanding, and shared life. Through work, learning, laughter, and reflection, they had found something rare and beautiful, a life fully lived together,